and welcome to this episode of Round Robin. I'm Robin McCormick, Communications and Marketing Director for Hampton, and I have with me my most frequent Round Robin guest, City Manager Mary Bunting.
Hi, how are you today? Glad to be back.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about the budget, but in a lot of ways it is the most important thing the city does because it determines priorities and how resources will be spent. So I know in some ways it's not the most exciting topic, but it is so important to people, and we want to bring this information to them at home so that they can participate and learn and give us feedback.
Absolutely. I've often said that the budget really is a reflection of the community's values. It is the game plan for what we're going to be able to do in a given year. And so there really is no more important topic for citizens or council members than the annual setting of the budget. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to come back a couple different times to help people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and hopefully to get their input early in the process.
Well, thank you. And I know last time we talked about expenses, and then the other side of the budget is revenue. So I want to ask you some questions today about the money that comes in. And I know we're looking at a drop because of the values of homes in Hampton have declined somewhere around 6%.
Right.
And that's going to necessarily change to the negative the amount of money we collect.
Right.
But so for the average homeowner, their property is worth 6% less. So, but it's not quite a 6% drop for the overall city property taxes because some values held constant in apartments and commercial, right?
Right. Actually, apartments went up slightly, and that's not too surprising given the housing market, as people are less likely to get home mortgages, either because the credit has tightened down or because they're just a little bit nervous about doing that right now.
Right.
They move into the rental market. And of course, when more people are going into the rental market, that causes the rates that folks can charge for rent to go up. It's
More
whole
demand.
basic demand and supply.
Right.
And so more demand, more income. And apartments and commercial are assessed upon their income. So as the income is going up for apartment complexes, their assessments are going up. And that improvement there, and the commercial values holding their own, has caused the overall decline for real estate in the city to be about 4.5%.
Okay.
But we do often focus on the residential 6% because when we're explaining the budget to residents, we want them to know how their budget's going to be impacted.
Right, and you know, property tax is kind of the go-to thing because it is the largest source of revenue for Hampton's budget. Is that right?
Absolutely. You know, single number one source of revenue for the city is real estate taxes, and that's for every city in Virginia. That's how Virginia has chosen to finance local government services.
Okay.
So when we take a hit, as we're doing because of the housing market, it impacts us very greatly in terms of our ability to balance the budget with, and having to look at cuts, and we're offsetting that revenue loss. A lot of people are saying, well, I'm losing value in my home. Isn't that a bad thing? And certainly we want people's homes to maintain value. But a lot of what's going on in the housing market is a course correction for overinflated values that happened as nationally our country was just growing the housing market very, very rapidly. And because of the easy credit that was available in the market at that time, people were paying more for homes than in retrospect they probably should have paid. And so what we're getting is, in essence, a course correction in the housing market. And this is happening not just in Hampton, it's happening all throughout the region and all throughout the country. In fact, Hampton's values and the regional values have dropped much less than other parts of the country have dropped. I have counterparts in Midwestern and Western states that are experiencing real estate losses in the neighborhood of 10 to 20%.
Wow.
So on the bad side, we're having some losses that we have to struggle with, but on the good side, our region and our city have fared relatively well in comparison to other communities.
So there are two reasons, though, that we're looking at the potential of property taxes and the property tax rate. And one is because it is the single biggest source. But the other one is because that is an area in which residents will naturally pay less unless something changes.
Right.
And even if the rate changes, many of us would still pay less. Can you explain that to us again?
This is a lot.
It's a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is counterintuitive, and a lot of people think that they've actually been paying more in taxes over the last several years when in fact they've been paying less in taxes. And if folks go to our online poll or on the slides we use for our online poll, because I think the poll is now closed, we can still have those charts up for them to look at. They can see what the average home or the typical home in different neighborhoods of our city have paid over the last 7 years. And in every part of our community, homeowners have been paying less in real estate taxes over the last several years. And that is because of this housing market course correction that I've been describing. What you pay in taxes is actually a function of your assessed value and rate. And the council has been looking at the rate really even since the market was going up. They lowered the rate.
They really did, pretty aggressively.
Pretty aggressively. I think in 2004 our rate was $1.27. Our rate today is $1.04. So in that period of time, the rate got adjusted downward, and that was a deliberate attempt to make sure that as housing values were going up, people didn't pay more, because it's sort of a mathematical equation.
Right.
And so if you have housing values going up and you leave the rate the same, you would pay more in taxes. So the council lowered it so people would pay about the same, or in some cases less in taxes. Same thing happens in reverse. As the housing values are going down, if we leave the rate the same, which we have done the last several years, residents actually pay less in taxes. So we could vary the rate, we could increase the rate, but actually have people pay the same or less in taxes. Using the 6% as an average, the average homeowner will experience about a 6% decrease in what they pay if we don't change the rate. We could change the rate by 1 penny, 2 pennies, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 6 before the average resident would pay the same. Only at 7 cents would the average homeowner pay more in taxes. And we certainly are very sensitive to the economic pressures all of our residents face. We don't necessarily want them to pay more in taxes, but this is a unique opportunity to increase the rate and still have people pay the same or less in taxes. And so we've been exploring with people, how do you feel about that? I mean, because one of the things I hear a lot from residents is they don't want to pay more, but they don't mind paying the same.
Right.
And so we can actually, to pay the same, we have to raise the rate. And as you said earlier, that's
that
counterintuitive.
just makes people nervous, you know?
It
it's like they'll say it, but then when they get to the rate numbers, as I've been watching the survey, they choke a little bit. It's a hard thing for people to understand.
Well, and 6 cents, a 6 cent tax increase sounds like a lot. It really does, and I understand. Mm-hmm. Even if the 6 cents would mean we only pay the same, it is very counterintuitive to think about raising the rate that much.
Well, and the fact that it hasn't been raised over several years of declines. I mean, I looked at pulled numbers from probably a dozen or 15 different neighborhoods in Hampton, and they were all different. I mean, they're all paying less this year than they were 5 years ago or 4 years ago. But some years, you know, Riverdale didn't go down, or Buckrow stayed flat for 3 years in a row and then dropped. So it's on a year-to-year basis, even what the average is doing, but really over a 5-year period, it's 95%. I mean, almost everyone is paying less, and in a lot of cases, a good bit less.
Right, and that's because we are required to assess property at market value. Some people think we just assess for whatever we want to. In fact, I've had some citizens say, well, rather than increasing the rate,
I've heard that.
Why don't you leave assessments the same?
Can't you just leave it the same?
And we can't. We are legally required to assess property at market value, which means we have to look at home sales. And if home sales have been going down, then we have to reflect by neighborhood what that really means, so that the rest of the residents in that neighborhood get the benefit of the true market value. So, but not every neighborhood changes the same.
Right.
There are some areas of the city that have held housing value better. Mm-hmm. As an example, Michael's Woods did not experience quite the same drop that some other neighborhoods did. I attribute that to the presence of Langley Air Force Base right by, because of the movement of military members, the turnover at homes. They've held value a bit better than maybe some other neighborhoods that haven't had the benefit of the same sort of natural attrition and movement of the housing market. So,
right.
Yeah, and so to change the rate, to find a sweet spot, that rate for every person that you could adjust it by, and no one person pay more in taxes, is very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. But certainly in this kind of market, we have the ability, to do that. When you're looking at a couple of pennies, 2, 3, 4 pennies.
Right.
And I think that's what the polling has really kind of shown, is that people don't necessarily want to pay less taxes and get less services. That
Yeah, they'd
really
like to pay less taxes and get the same or more
Right.
service, but
Right.
it's just not going to.
But not less taxes
not
and less.
possible.
And it's just not realistic to pay less in taxes continually, as we have done the last 3 years, and get the same.
Right.
We know that in our own home.
So it's a choice.
Yeah. And so one of the choices we ask people is, less taxes, less service, same taxes, same service, more taxes, more service, so that they would understand what we're facing. And the overwhelming majority of people said they wanted to pay the same and or more. When you put those two categories together, overwhelming part of our community wants to maintain investment in city services. It's just that sweet spot. At what rate can you really do that and not cause people to pay more in taxes? And I emphasize the only reason we have focused so much on real estate taxes is because it's been the only tax that we could actually change rate and people pay the same or less.
Okay.
Any other tax we would look to increase would actually cause people to pay more. And we've really tried to focus on where people could pay the same or less.
Well, now, also along the lines of property tax, one of the things I was going to ask about is the city gets a lot of criticism for example, the purchase of the Harbor Square apartments. But part of that is a long-term plan to put more things on that property that would generate more in taxes, so that it isn't all falling on the homeowners, or at least today's homeowners, or the homeowners on a fixed income. I mean, economic development and reuse of some of our land is part of a longer term plan. Is that?
Absolutely. One of the things that the city did many years ago was recognize that we were going to need to diversify our economic base. And there are a couple places we can do that. One of them is in the housing market. If you look at our average housing values in Hampton, they are less than most of the communities on the peninsula and even in Southampton roads. And so what we want to do is get a slightly higher value housing product. We want to have affordable housing, but we don't want to have more than our fair share of affordable housing. We want to have about our fair share of affordable, mid-range, and upper income housing. That's important because that diversity of housing value allows us to not put too much tax burden on any one resident.
Right.
And so Harbor Square as an example, and last time we talked about how that came out of a different pot of money. It came out of effectively our savings account or one-time money. But beyond that, it was a strategic investment to go in and take out a complex that had pretty low values because of the quality, the substandard quality of the housing, take it out, redevelop it, and ultimately get a higher mix of values, real estate values. And of course the city's plans are not so precise at this point that I can tell you how many homes of what value, but the master plan calls for a mixed use development of integrated workforce housing and upper income housing, as well as some commercial and neighborhood retail. And so that would actually bring in more real estate tax dollars naturally, as opposed to us having to raise a rate on anybody.
And similarly, there's redevelopment planned in Buckrow with the Hampton Housing and Redevelopment Authority, but a lot of economic development is just stalled right now. I mean, it would be tough, I would think, right now to get someone to come in with a proposal to build slightly more costly than average homes in that area. It's just the market won't tolerate it at this point.
Right.
But in terms of the long-term plan, there are some things that the city has been doing to try to make economic development happen to generate increases in revenues.
Right, and sometimes you have to be poised to be able to take advantage when the market turns. So some of these acquisitions, which I acknowledge have been somewhat controversial, have been important so that we are poised to take advantage of the economy when it improves. And of course, national indicators indicate that we are making a recovery, a slow one, but a recovery nonetheless. And so we want to have the property available to be able to come in and get that economic benefit for our larger community as the market improves.
Well, for example, the city owns some of the land that the CVS pharmacy in Phoebus is going in on and sold that land, right?
Right. A lot of times people think all we do is buy, and never sell. Actually, if you were to look at the last 10 years, we have sold as much property as we've bought in terms of value, about a break even. And so what we're doing is buying up underutilized properties, and then when the market allows, flipping them into private use that gets us a higher yield or higher return. And CVS is a great example. The city sold a parcel right there at Mercury and Woodland, and CVS has come in. They paid market value for the property, and they're building a CVS pharmacy that the Phoebus residents felt was a missing link in their community. We also nearby have another piece of property that we sold, which is going to be made into senior living complex. The Marlin Development Corporation bought that property from us, and they are getting ready to do a senior living facility.
So we are seeing some movement in terms of those long-term projects coming to fruition.
Right. Another example of the economic development that we do is trying to incentivize the retail market as well. And some people say, well, why do you incentivize retail? It is lower income jobs. But there are people in our community who want those types of jobs. Teenagers, for instance.
I was going to say, mine does.
As their first entree into the workplace, learning work, demonstrating that you have a work ethic. Teenagers often need those types of retail and restaurant jobs to help pay for college or what have you.
Right.
So they are important jobs on that level. But more importantly, we get more tax benefit from retail and restaurants and admission types of venues like a movie theater than we do, from a high-paying job. And I know that's also counterintuitive, but the state makes all the money on the high-income jobs in our area with the income tax.
Income tax, okay.
But that said, we want high-income jobs, and we pursue those as well.
Because then those people can spend money.
Because those people can spend money, and they can buy the homes, and they make for a healthy economy. And we certainly want all of our residents to have the maximum type of job they can have. So our economic strategy is diversified in all of those areas: housing value, retail, high-wage jobs, and of course tourism, bringing external visitors to our community to spend money, because those are the best kind. They're spending money, paying money into our coffers with their taxes, and not requiring the city services.
So real quickly, other ways the city can raise money. Sales tax we can't raise, right?
We cannot raise the retail sales, but we can raise meals tax, lodging tax, and admissions tax.
And that's something that comes into play. It's tough to be the only one in the region with a higher tax rate in those areas, I would assume, but it is something you're looking at.
Yes, we would look at it if other communities are also considering raising them, because if we do it together, then we don't lose competitive advantage. We certainly don't want to be at a higher rate than other communities. And we also look at, quite frankly, how is that going to impact our average resident too? Because even with, like, say, meals tax, it has become a way of life for many people to eat out more frequently than they used to. Two
career families have a hard time, without eating out some.
Right.
What about, and I hate to bring this up because I know it's a painful topic and we can only just touch on it briefly, the dreaded personal property or car tax?
And that is something we could raise. Some people think we can't because of what the state did many years ago, but local governments can raise it. I know of several localities that have released budgets that have a personal property tax increase in it. In all candor, I think that's more onerous than the real estate tax. As most people know, you write a check for that 2 times a year in December and June, and it's a big check when you have to write it.
It's hard, especially in December.
Right, oh, absolutely. And if you were to raise that rate, that would be an example of a tax where people would absolutely pay more, whereas with the real estate, as we discussed earlier, they could pay less.
And they pay it over a 12-month period into escrow. Most people, certainly if you own your home outright, you do have to write that check.
Right, but that personal property is just very painful. And when you're living paycheck to paycheck, that big check you've got to write in December or June does hit you harder.
It's hard.
So, it is an option. It's one that, we lay on the table as an option for council and the residents to consider. It's not one that I personally think we should look at raising. If we had to raise something, I think real estate actually, as we've discussed, would impact people less.
Right. It's not a tax increase necessarily, it's a rate change.
A rate change.
Well, is there anything else? I suppose there's a variety of fees, both large and small, that I know we talked about ambulance fees, for example, that get billed to insurance companies.
Right.
That got passed at council, a change there. Fees for other things, are we looking at that as well?
Yes, we do look at fees, and we predominantly look at fees that are associated with use of a service. So for instance, when you go to apply for a rezoning or put in a site plan and have to have that reviewed by staff, trying to capture as much of the cost without being uncompetitive.
Right, but the
of
actual
what it
cost
actually
of-
costs. Because why should all taxpayers have to subsidize a site plan review for a developer who's trying to build a project? That really should be borne by the developer. So we do look at those each year to try to make sure we're keeping them, covering the cost of service as much as possible. But again, we don't want to be so high that we're uncompetitive and people say, well, don't do business in Hampton.
Right.
So,
okay.
and the ambulance fee you talked about is a really good example of where we try to be creative and tap into money that doesn't hurt our residents. That is a fee that's paid by the insurance companies. So that we can raise that and have no impact on Hampton residents. We like to do those. We really want
Right,
to
you're
make
thinking creatively and looking for ways to recoup costs from someone other than the homeowner. Well, thank you. I think we've spent a lot of time talking and probably need to wrap it up today.
Okay, well, again, thanks for having me. And our budget will be released in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about what it actually says and doesn't say, because I know residents are really anxious to find out what we cut and don't cut.
Good. Well, I think we're scheduled to have you back to talk about the release of the budget, so I appreciate that.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you for watching this episode of Round Robin. Please come back again.